Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss Russia's potential endgames in Ukraine. I'm recording this on the 30th of March 2022, and it is right after Russia started phase 2 of its military operations in Ukraine. There are already some well-known facts, and there are some quite valuable observations and informations that we can work on. And I think just usually every rational player who enters a conflict such as this would have a range of acceptable endgames. So it is now fitting, in my opinion, to start discussing and analyzing what could be the potential endgames that are acceptable to Russia. In particular, in this podcast, I wanted to divide it into two sections. First, I want to go over the facts and informations that we have. Specifically, I'm listing 5 facts and 3 additional pieces of information that we can work on. And then on the second part, in the second part, I want to list 3 potential endgames. One is the minimal one endgame, one in the medium, and of course one is Maxima. Maxima is like a Maxima endgame. And I also want to discuss Russia's potential approach to get from here to the Maxima endgame. First, let's talk about the facts. And as I said, there are 5. First, the first fact, Russia stated its military objectives at the start of this operation. It said that it wanted to secure Donbas, the separatist regions. It wants to demilitarize Ukraine, make it neutral, and it wants to deradicalize the country, to get rid of the radical militant element in Russian society. In Ukrainian society. The second fact is that Russia has focused its military operations in the eastern part of Ukraine, mostly in Donbas, but also in the land bridge from Crimea to Donbas. The third part is that Russia had made significant progress in creating this land bridge and in pushing the Ukrainian forces out of the Donbas region. The focus has not so far been on Kiev. The fourth fact is that Russia has now openly stated that it wants to lead or participate in the lead in the world to de-dollarize, to stop the reserve system of a fiat currency, but instead to help form a new global system that is based on basically balanced fiscal balance. That is not based on debasing the currency, a new currency financial system based on commodities and goods and services rather than printing money based on faith and trust. And the last fact is that by placing all these sanctions, the European Union in particular has put itself in a very bad position. Very vulnerable position. But at the same time, the European public has been worked up against Russia, so that it really leaves very little room, or in fact no room, for European leaders or politicians to maneuver. These are the 5 facts that I want to focus on. And then there are 3 pieces of information. The first is that according to the Russians, now there are some sources who would disagree, but according to the Russians, they have largely succeeded in demilitarizing Ukraine. Mostly because they have, even though they haven't annihilated the Ukrainian army, they have immobilized it. They have caused large amounts of casualties in the Ukrainian army, and they have surrounded the most elite forces of the Ukrainian army. And according to the Russians, they have also largely succeeded, but not completely succeeded, in ridding Ukraine of the radical forces, radical elements. So this is the first piece of information that is not necessarily a fact just yet. Secondly, we have just seen this week that Ukraine has, for the first time in this series of negotiations, become serious. It made a serious proposal stating that it would remain neutral. But of course, I think the current propositions that Ukraine has made is still unacceptable to the Russians. Thirdly, it seems, and this is not necessarily a certain thing, but it seems that NATO is not going to intervene in Ukraine. There are some elements largely, I guess, in the State Department, may wish to intervene directly in Ukraine, and perhaps even outside of Ukraine, because some elements, some people in the State Department may, I want to emphasize this as may, wish to start a world war in order to maintain the hegemonic position of the United States, even if just for a few more decades. Even if United States suffers a fatal blow, as long as it can remain the number one power for a few more decades, it may help these people, these neo-conservatives, to achieve their personal goals in crafting a new world order. So these are the informations and facts. Now let's move on to the end games. I have 3 potential end games, and I want to discuss them. The first is a minima, right? This is the minimally acceptable end game for Russia. And this is basically the, let's call it integration or annexation, accession, however you call it, of Crimea and Donbas into Russia, to assure that Ukraine will be demilitarized, perhaps having only a small army and to remain neutral. And of course, all the radical elements of Ukraine will be eliminated. This is the stated objective that Russia made in the beginning of the military operations. I think it is very difficult for the Russian leadership to walk back from this openly stated objective. Of course, if Russia had been losing, it may be possible, and of course, if Russia is suffering economically a lot by the sanctions, it may be feasible, it may be possible for Russia to accept a worse outcome. But currently, it appears that Russia is winning militarily. It appears that the Russian economy has not really suffered much from all these sanctions. On the contrary, it is the Europeans who are suffering and who are to suffer much more, much worse. This means that at a minimum, Russia would accept these 3 points. But this would entail that Russia would have to give up part of the land that it has gained control of, building the land bridge specifically between Donbas and Crimea. I think, nevertheless, this is something that the Russian leadership will be able to sell to its people. There will be resistance inside inside Russia. There will be resistance inside the Russian political structure. But it's something that if Ukraine can agree on, I think this is something that can be done. This is acceptable to Russia. Having said that, it appears that there is very little incentive for Russia to stick to this minimally acceptable outcome, this minima. It appears that a political solution is not really clearly on the horizon. It appears that it is currently very difficult for the Ukrainians to accept the secession of Donbas and to give up Crimea. This seems very difficult. And so what could happen is in the second phase of Russia's military operation, if these agreements cannot be reached, I think that Russia could move to the medium outcome. The second alternative, second endgame. And this is to build a land bridge to Transnistria. Now, Russia almost has control. It's very close to establishing this. It needs to take out, I think it's called Nikolaev, or is it Mykolaiv? I don't know, I'm sorry. That Nikolaev, I think, and Odessa. If Russia manages to take these regions, then it will be able to build a complete land bridge from all the way from Rostov to the border of Moldova. And this would basically integrate most, let's say, of the Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. And this would, in the long term, solve Russia's lingering problems. And I think at this point, if Russia is able to gain control of these regions, then it is less dangerous for Ukraine to drift towards, say, the European Union. It will be less dangerous. But nevertheless, I think at this point, if Russia manages to achieve this, it will still push for a neutrality, and it may still wish to push for a demilitarized Ukraine. At that point, I think perhaps that will be the end of phase 2, and I think at that point the negotiators from Ukraine will face another dilemma. Do they accept a worse deal tomorrow? Basically, essentially, do they accept a worse deal that they have than the one that they have already rejected, perhaps 1 month earlier? And that is a very difficult thing for them to do. But if they don't accept it, the deal back then, and I think it could still be quite difficult for them to accept it, then I think Russia would go to the Maxima endgame. And this, I think, personally, is the most likely one. In this final endgame, Russia would further gain control of the Kharkov region and the I think it's called the Dnipro region. Basically, taking the Dnipro River and take everything to the east of it, and also along the Black Sea. Take these regions. These are the regions that really have either a predominantly Russian-speaking population or a significant Russian-speaking population. Outside of Kiev, of course. With these regions in control, I think what Russia can then do is to, rather than forcing the likes of neutrality and so on the Ukrainians, all the Ukrainians would have to do at that point is to sign an armistice, a ceasefire, and then Russia will be okay with that situation. At that point, as long as Ukraine does not really become a base for NATO, and I think NATO will not want Ukraine at that point to be a base, Russia will be perhaps very happy to have the remainder of Ukraine to join all these Western institutions, the European Union in particular, and perhaps Russia would have no problem to encourage Poland, which has been really worked up in trying to achieve that, to seize Western Ukraine, to annex Western Ukraine. I think the Poles are really worked up. They really want to annex part of Ukraine. I think Russia will have no problem with that. And at that point, I think Russia would have achieved the maximal outcome. I think it would be unrealistic to expect Russia to take Kiev and to occupy the central Ukraine. That, I think, it's something that even the Russians do not want to do. And in one of my earlier podcasts, I suggested, and I still believe that is correct, I suggested that Russia should have used the tactics that Soviet Union used in Czechoslovakia, in Prague, basically quickly seize the political structure in Kiev in the first day of the military operations, to make sure that there is no more viable central control in Ukraine, and it also would mean that the military would lose communications and orders, and a lot of the standard Ukrainian military could just desert. I think that would have been a good start for this operation. But that does not mean that Russia should occupy Kiev. It just means that you cut the head off, right? But for whatever reason, and I'm pretty sure that they have much better reasons than I do, they did not go there. And now I think Russia certainly would not go into Kiev, especially seeing that it appears that the Ukrainian government are no longer operating in Kiev. So it doesn't really make any sense to get into a city that will be very difficult to clear because it's the largest city of the country, and a place that Russia will ultimately be unable to occupy, and perhaps unwilling to occupy. Now, I think the most likely is, as I said, to take all the land along the Black Sea, Donbas, of course, and the Kharkov region, Kharkov and the Dnipro region, everything to the east of the Dnipro River. I think that is the most likely endgame. And to reach there, I think Russia is not in a hurry. It appears that every day passes, Russia's position economically and diplomatically seem to be getting stronger, and the EU's position gets weaker, mostly because of really suicidal decisions made by the European bureaucracy. So perhaps, and since that Russia has openly stated that one of its goals is to de-dollarize the world and to really get rid of the euro, it could be that Russia wants to keep this operation somewhat long, to drag it into the autumn. And by doing so, it would trigger a very, very harsh basically summer and autumn, and it would lead to political instability in the European Union, the major economies, particularly in Germany, but I think perhaps also in the likes of France, and maybe also in Italy and Spain. These are the main countries of the EU. When these countries have become unstable, I think the Russians may be laughing. I'm not, even though I'm trying to make this analysis objective, and by doing so, I may appear to be rather favoring Russia. I just want to say that I'm not suggesting the Russians are angels. I think some people in Russia may have this schadenfreude and may feel a little bit of giggly inside, seeing that the Europeans commit suicide. Anyway, this is today's podcast. I hope that you may find some of these information interesting. And if you don't agree with these endgames, do leave a comment. And if you agree that perhaps one of these endgames may play out, also leave a comment and give me a like, subscribe, share. Know that this video is also available. This podcast is also available on Odyssey and Rumble. Thank you very much and have a great day.